morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Sheila Speaks, a podcast that's designed to empower, educate, inform, uplift, and impact your life, the quality of your life, the things you deal with in your life. And boy, do we have a historical, once-in-a-lifetime moment today with our guest. Today, we have Rose Hampton. Rose is the founder and CEO of Blueprints for Excellence, a business process management consulting firm that's based in Denver and North Carolina. She has the unique ability to translate the hopes and dreams of CEOs, business owners, and key executives into language, processes, and systems that makes those dreams tangible and accessible to the teams accounting for delivering results. For 35 years, Rose has been recognized for contributing to the consistent performance of a Fortune 10 company. As a consultant to small business owners, today her attention is on transforming your concerns into solutions and your dreams into reality. Now, this brings us to why Rose is with us today. Something else that's unique about Rose. She is the first cousin once removed to civil rights icon Rosa Parks. And here today, she's here to share with us from her perspective of Rosa Parks as her cousin, as Rosa Parks as a family member, and the quality of her life and her perspective as her cousin. Rosa Parks is best known for her pivotal role in the Montgomery, Alabama bus cop. Congress has called her the First Lady of Civil Rights and the mother of the freedom movement. When you look at everything we're dealing with in life right now today and the pivotal role that she played, this really brings us to this moment in time. So hello there, Rose. How are you?
Hey, Sheila. I am great, thanks, and glad to be with you.
I am so happy you're here with us. I didn't say this, but Rose is also a very good friend of mine. Yeah, it's so good to be with you. So good to be having this conversation, which, by the way, this conversation will be on our website where you can see it under podcasts, because she's actually going to share a little of the story, the personal, intimate story with a family member that you won't hear or see anywhere else. So I'm just so excited that you're here.
Thank you, Sheila. I'm happy to be here. Let's have some fun.
Let's have some fun with this. All right. Well, Rose, tell us, who is Rosa Parks? Tell us. Share.
She's my cousin.
Yes.
So Sheila, let's start here. Here's a quote from Rosa. At the time I was arrested, I had no idea it would turn into this. It was just a day like any other day. The only thing that made it significant was that the masses of the people joined in. So what I'm hearing is a perfect place to have a conversation that connects with exactly what's happening today with the masses of people who are joining in.
Yes. Wow. That's amazing what you just shared. It really does. I'm sure George Floyd woke up that morning. I'm sure you woke up that morning. I'm sure I woke up that morning. Do you know what I mean? We wake up one way, and the next thing you know, life is a whole nother other way. It's what she's saying.
Yes.
All right. Well, tell us a little bit about where she was born, etc.
Yes. So she was actually born Rosa Louise Macaulay, which is also my maiden name, and she was born in February of 1913. She married, actually when she was 19, she married Raymond Parks and became Rosa Parks. Just a little bit about how we got to the day on the bus. it was Raymond, her husband, who was actually active in and introduced Rosa to the NAACP. She was a seamstress by day. She worked for a large department store, but once she got introduced to the NAACP, she worked tirelessly as an activist in her off time. And it was on December 1st of 1955 that she was actually arrested for not giving her seat up on the bus to a white passenger.
Wow.
So, and let me tell you just a little bit about, what that sounded like.
Yeah.
Because there was not anything raucous or untoward about it. There was it was amazing the way it happened. She was asked to give up her seat. She sat there. The bus driver said to her, and she had words with this bus driver before. And he said to her, if you don't get up out of that seat, I'm going to call the police and have you arrested. And she said, sir, you may do that.
Wow.
That is who Rosa Parks was.
Wow, that's amazing. And wait, one thing you said she had some rumblings with this bus driver before, huh?
Yeah, she had. So there were a lot of practices back then. It was actually a very humiliating experience, more so than we probably realized. But our Black people would get on the bus, and if they didn't have proper change, the bus driver might not accept their fare, ask them to get off the bus and pull off.
Wow.
Or they had to get on the bus, pay their fare. Hopefully they had the right change. Then they had to get off the bus, go around to the back door, get on the bus in the back to see if there was a seat in the back, a colored seat in the back available.
Wow.
There could be empty seats that were designated for white passengers, but they were not allowed to sit there.
Wow.
Or sometimes the bus drivers would do things like somebody would get on the bus, pay their fare, get off to get on the back seat, and they'd close the doors and pull off and laugh. I mean, there was all kinds of just insults and indignities that our people suffered back then in the process of trying to use the public transportation system in segregated cities.
Wow, thank you for that. All right, and then she was fingerprinted and booked.
She was.
Okay, wow.
Calm as a cucumber.
I mean, look at her. 7053. All right.
So, there had been other people, particularly women, who had been arrested for not giving up their seats on the bus. Rosa was actually not the first, but she was the one. She was the upstanding member of the community. She was, the dignified lady, impeccable reputation, one that the quote establishment couldn't denigrate or tear apart.
Wow, outstanding. And this screen says, remember, we are fighting for a cause. Do not ride a bus today.
Yes. Now that was December 5th of 1955.
Wow.
And it was originally intended to be a one-day event that ended up lasting 381 days. So what's really interesting about that? That took commitment, communication, coordination,
yes,
courage, perseverance. And I venture to say we're going to have to look at all of that with what's going on today if we're going to make a difference.
Yeah, and it's so great what you're saying, Rose, and sharing. And it also took just a stand. Yeah. The song that they would sing back then, the We Will Not Be Moved. 381 days. If you're out there listening, we're asking you to do one thing. Go vote November 3rd, 2020.
Exactly.
Really. But
Right.
really. And if you're listening, it is our job to do whatever we need to do to see to it that that happens. All right, I had to say that because it was just right there. 381 days, that's like to not ride the bus, which meant, if you're listening, people did what, Rose, back then?
Yeah, listen, first of all, they walked. They walked. They carpooled. They created, what would you call it? You know, it's like, what would you call an Uber back in 1955, right?
Yeah, they created, listen, we never acknowledged this, but they created carpooling.
They created carpooling.
We didn't call it that. We didn't have that language, but if you look at it, they created that.
That's exactly what they did.
And they walked. They walked to work. They walked home from work. They did not ride the bus.
They did. They did whatever it took. They took taxis. They, figured out how to raise funds to support each other, to make sure that, people were able to get where they needed to go, or get what they needed from wherever it was that they had to get to. So they figured out how to do what it took. And they did it collectively.
Yes.
Right? And they met and communicated on a regular basis to make sure that everybody was in agreement. Do you want to continue this? It's not like they just said, keep doing it. They kept saying to the community, are you still in for this? And they would bond together and say yes.
Wow.
It was amazing.
All right.
Yes.
That's just, I'm just moved by this whole conversation today. All right, Rose, let's move to the next slide here.
Okay. So, like we said, 381 days. You know what's interesting? Can I just say one more thing about this?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So Black people were at least 65% of the ridership of the bus company at that point in time. And so they estimated it amounted to about a $3,000 a day loss for the bus company, which if you take into consideration inflation, it would be like, the value of that would be like 9 times today, right? So 3 times 9 is 27, is that right? So $27,000 a day, right? So, but 381 days, that would have been the equivalent of $10 million.
Yes.
That was on the line, right? So interesting. It was one little city. It started in one little city. So it was inch wide, but it lasted 381 days. So it was mile deep, and it had a significant financial impact on the establishment.
Yes.
And they made a change.
Yes. I'm so glad you said that, because that is the one place in the United States of America, if you want to make a change, you got to hit them in the pocket.
It's got to have a significant impact somewhere, right?
Yeah, economically. On the economic structure. Yes.
So we have a lot of people today who are participating in the peaceful protests. So I would almost say it's mile wide.
Yeah.
But right now, maybe it's only inch deep because we don't have the punch yet, right? And not punch like violence, because that was a completely nonviolent movement back then.
Yes.
Totally and completely, at least on the part of the protesters.
Absolutely.
There was a lot of antagonizing on the other side, but so I think there's something here for us to look back to today.
Yeah.
How do we make a difference?
Absolutely. And just all I can say is yes right now. I mean, because we're going to do this conversation, and we may do more, because I'm really into this whole, justice and inequality, racism, and I don't want to say a new America, the United States of America as a possibility for all humanity.
Yes.
For all humanity. There's enough for everyone. We all need a transformation here. So, but you and I can talk about that all night, right? So, and this
Yes.
was the movement. Go ahead. Let's talk about Dr. King. This is when he took the leadership.
Good, right? Okay, so this is when Martin Luther King stepped up to take leadership of that entire movement, and it eventually led to the filing of a lawsuit, first in a district court, a federal court, and then subsequently bumped up to the Supreme Court. But the outcome of all of that was that the Jim Crow laws, including segregation on the Alabama public transportation system, was determined it violated the U.S. Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
And it was interesting because, of course, you know, there was a lot of pushback around the actual implementation. It wasn't easy sailing just because the Supreme Court made that ruling, but it did make that ruling in November of 1956, and eventually that got implemented in Alabama and other southern cities as well. The interesting thing is that was a full 91 years after slavery had been abolished. 91 years later before you could, you know, sit where you wanted on the bus.
Wow.
So, and that was the beginning of, you know, Rosa's legendary life as the mother of the civil rights movement. And frankly, between you and I, she struggled with that a little bit because she was really a very quiet. You know, it's interesting because she worked as an activist tirelessly.
Yeah.
But she was really a very quiet and you know, like sort of private person.
Yeah.
And so to have her life, live the rest of her life, so to speak, on stage was a challenge for her. But anyway.
I'm sure it was. Yes. And for all of us listening today, including myself, including Rose, you know, God uses ordinary people.
Yes.
He really does.
So Sheila, that is the perfect segue, because I definitely believe that Rosa was used, and I want to look at that. So will you look with me?
Okay, let's do it. Come on, let's go to the next one. You guys, if you're listening, you'll have to go to my website for this one, www.saintjamesmedia.com. All right, go ahead. Go ahead, Rosa. Hold on. And today, if you're listening again, we have Rose Hampton, the cousin of Rosa Parks, sharing a story from a very intimate and a family perspective. All right, Rose, keep going, keep sharing.
Thanks, Sheila.
You're welcome.
Okay. All right. So let's look at a little bit at what was going on, you know, a couple of generations before Rosa was born, right?
Okay.
So back in the 1860s, it was November of 1860 when Abraham Lincoln was elected president of the United States. There were, you know, a number of southern states very intimidated by his election. They were very concerned about the preservation of slavery, states' rights, white supremacy, and subsequently decided to secede from the Union. Now that's really interesting because, you know, we're dealing with all these Confederate memorabilia at this time, right? And yet, you know, I really struggled because secession from the United States of America was fundamentally an act of treason. So it's interesting, right? Yes. That the memorabilia would be celebrated to begin with. But I digress.
Listen, I got it. This is your shot, Rose. Take it. Take it.
Oh, okay. So we know, you know, a number of southern states seceded from the Union in 1861, and they even had the audacity to elect their own president, right? Okay. So April of 1861 saw the start of the Civil War, and it was, you know, almost 2 full years later before Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. Technically not the end of the war yet, but it was in sight. Now, the interesting thing about the Emancipation Proclamation was it was not the intention of the Emancipation Proclamation to free the slaves. That was a, what do you call it when you get something, help me, Sheila, here.
I know. Tell me. I know what you're saying. What's the word?
It was like a benefit. It was like an additional benefit. The original intention of the Emancipation Proclamation was to starve the Confederate Army of the resources that blacks were to the Army, to the Confederate Army. So that was the original intent of the Emancipation Proclamation. And along with it, slaves in the Confederate States were supposedly granted their freedom, but we know that it didn't really happen like that, right? So
to be continued, yeah.
Right? Okay.
Yeah.
But then in 1865, Robert E. Lee actually surrendered to the Union Army, ending the war. And 10 days, 15 days later, not even, how many days later? 5 days later, Lincoln was assassinated by a Confederate sympathizer.
So they say. Yeah.
So they say.
Yeah, we know how. Okay, great.
Now,
I digress. Okay.
You're allowed. Now, one of the things that that is said is that the assassination of Lincoln actually set civil rights back 100 years, because Lincoln did actually have a plan to bring the black population up to full citizenship. So he had a plan. Now, who knows if the implementation would have gone like that, right? But at least it was his intention to bring a level of parity among all people.
Well, he had an intention and a vision.
Yes. Yes. Right. Especially a vision. Right.
Yes.
So okay. So that never happened. That had an impact. Certainly had an impact on civil rights. And of course, immediately in the aftermath of all of that, Jim Crow, sprang up everywhere. And within a year, the Ku Klux Klan was formed.
Can you talk a little bit about Jim Crow? There are people listening, like I said, in one of my earlier podcasts, when I talked about injustice and inequality, I really did. I had a friend who said, wow, I didn't know about any of this. This wasn't in my history book. Well, it's not in the history book. And that's why I'm like standing for not rewriting the history book. Write the history book. Just tell the truth.
Yeah. Yes, so, I get that.
Yeah. So as Rose said, immediately the roots of Jim Crow began, governing every aspect, you got to get the words here, every aspect of life for blacks. Then the Ku Klux Klan was formed in Tennessee, and in 1868, Alabama readmitted to the Union. All right, and then anything else about our history that you want to include, Rose?
Yeah, so just very quickly, that was in the 1860s. But let's jump ahead about 30 years, and let's look at just one important case from the 1890s. And there's so many more examples. Yeah. But I just want to share this one, right? This was Plessy versus Ferguson. So Louisiana had what was called the Separate Car Act. So blacks and whites had to ride in separate cars. Homer Plessy was a man who was 7/8 Caucasian, 1/8 African. And in June of 1892, he took a seat on a rail car in a whites only section. And he actually let the conductor know, oh, by the way, I'm part black. I'm colored. And the conductor said, then you need to move. And he refused and was jailed. So this is interesting, right? Because this is in the 1890s. So this is like 65 years before the Alabama bus boycott.
Wow.
There's this, so here's this instance really where already the black community was, litigating for its rights, for equal rights.
Mm-hmm.
And this case also went up to the Supreme Court, but in this case, the Supreme Court actually upheld the conviction that separate but equal was okay. And of course, that proliferated from this case.
Wow.
So we have a snapshot of what's going on in the 1860s and what's going on in the 1890s.
You know, this is really amazing. So if you have any unclarity why we say Black Lives Matter, all this is what's been and is at play, including what's happening now. So it's really great. Thank you for bringing some of the history to the conversation and the context of the life of Rosa Parks. So now we really want to hear a little about Rosa Parks as a family member.
All right. Well, I want to show you something.
Okay.
So I'm excited to show you this. Right?
Yeah, I'm excited too.
Okay. So, a little family history. I'm going to show you Rosa's grandparents, born around the 1830s.
Now wait, are these the grandparents or the great-grandparents?
Sorry, great-grandparents.
Okay, great. All right.
Born around the 1830s, so, coming of age around the 1860s. So we talked about what was going on in the 1860s, right?
Yes.
All right, so here are Rosa's great-grandparents. Her grandfather was Colonel Henry Macaulay, who was a colonel in the Confederate Army, we do believe, although there is another theory, the slave auctioneers, the slave trader auctioneers,
yes,
were also called colonel.
Uh-huh.
So there's another thread that maybe he could have been an auctioneer, a slave trade auctioneer.
This is when we need Henry. This is when we need Henry Louis Gates. But go ahead.
Yeah. But anyway, we believe, based on everything that we know, we believe he was a colonel in the Confederate Army.
Okay.
And this is not his wife, because he was married, but after his marriage, he had a consort with a Poarch Creek Indian woman named Gyogi. We have no last name. And they had 2 children. So now we don't know the nature of this relationship, but they had 2 children. Gyogi ended up raising the little girl. Henry Macaulay was enamored with the little boy, Anderson, took him into the household and raised Anderson.
Okay.
So this is Colonel Macaulay and Gyogi, great-grandparents, and Anderson, Rosa's granddad.
Wow.
Okay. Now, on the other side, somewhere else in Alabama, Clendenin Collins was a plantation owner, and he had a slave on his plantation, Elizabeth. And they also had 2 children, a boy and a girl. The little boy was raised by Elizabeth, but Clendenin was enamored with Louisa and took Louisa into the household and raised her with his 2 daughters by his wife.
Wow.
So that was interesting.
Very interesting.
The other thing that we don't, with Colonel Macaulay and Gyogi, that relationship could have been, because there were Indians who were also slaves, so that could have been the same kind of relationship. But we're pretty clear that Elizabeth, was slave property. And, once the slave trade, bringing Africans over was outlawed, it was pretty common practice that the plantation owners practiced, if not required, but at least practiced, that every woman of childbearing age in their slaves would have a child at least once every 2 years to replenish the workforce for the plantation. So, we don't know if there was any other kind of relationship other than that between Clendenin and Elizabeth.
Got
But our
it.
guess is that she was, having children as required.
Now, inside that requirement,
Yes.
I think this is the first time I've heard that, or if I've heard it, I've forgotten it. But
Yes.
inside that requirement, was that by the slave master,
Yes.
slave owner, or it could be by anyone? Or was that requirement specifically?
Oh, I see how it got fulfilled.
Yeah. Yes.
So I would imagine it varied, right, from plantation to plantation based on the mindset of the owner. But I'm pretty sure that the intention was, look, if you're not in a relationship that enables you to have one, I'll handle it for you.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So, okay. So isn't that interesting?
Amazing.
So we see the great-grandparents and we see the grandparents, each of whom were taken into the household and raised as if, hey, I matter.
Mm.
I matter.
Wow. Amazing.
So there they are, Anderson Macaulay and Louisa Collins, Rose's grandparents, who were born in the 60s and came of age in the 90s, about the time of Plessy Ferguson.
Wow.
This is interesting, right?
Yes.
So it's almost like, hey, what kinds of conversations was Miss Rosa Parks born into?
Yeah, this is amazing.
Right?
You won't read this in the history books. All right, Rose, keep going.
Okay. All right. So Anderson and Louisa had 13 children. And 2 of the 13 were James and Robert, 2 of the boys. James was Rose's dad, and Robert is my grandfather.
Wow. And that's your connection. That's how you're related to Rosa Parks.
That's my connection to Rosa Parks.
Awesome.
Okay, so for those of you who are listening by podcast, right, I'm going to get into some of the family photos. So you're going to have to imagine that you're sitting here with me. I've got the book on my lap, and I'm showing you some pictures, right?
And they are amazing pictures.
So right now, I'm showing you a picture. So like both of those boys, James and Robert, had sons first. So Rose's brother, Sylvester, and my father. So I'm showing you a picture of these 2 handsome dudes. And could they be twins, Sheila?
I mean, they look just like twins. Amazing. Amazing.
Both in their uniforms, so interesting. Anyway, all right. So let's look at James Macaulay, then married Leona Edwards, and those were Rose's parents, and she was born in February of 1913.
Mm.
So here's a little girl, right? And I'm going to show you another picture.
Wow.
Of her with her parents. Now, podcasters, I don't know what stores were the Bloomingdale's or Neiman Marcus's of the 1913 in the 1913
Look at the dress.
times, right? But
Yes.
I mean, if you could see this picture, they are dressed. How would you say it, Sheila?
Oh, it's fabulous. The
Right?
dress the mom has on, look at the little lapels coming down and the V-neck and her hair. His suit, he's sharp as a tack. And then Rosa's dress is just gorgeous and feminine. And even look at that stroller.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just fascinating.
So if you look at this family portrait, this is like
Royalty.
like a very upscale, influential, right?
Yes.
Family.
Definitely.
Right? This little girl is sitting in this stroller. I guess she's about 3, would you say? 3 or 4?
Yes.
That
Probably
little
more
girl
like 3.
about 3, okay.
Mm-hmm.
That little girl was raised thinking she was somebody.
Yes.
So if you think about the conversation, the ancestral conversation that she was born into, and the circumstances of the family that raised her, I almost, I say that she was positioned, right, by ancestry and by fate to be the one.
Yes. Oh, I'm just moved by this whole thing. This is like incredible. You know, when you are touched, when you are called, you know, we say a lot, to whom much is given, much is required. And in this case, and in a lot of the cases, you know, back then and even now, it's not even that much is given. When you've been called and you've been singled out, much is required. And pretty much it's a thankless job when that happens, but it doesn't matter because you're in the context of being a servant and being of service and being a gift and being a contribution and letting your light shine and just looking at the dignity of your family, Rose, and the dignity, just looking at this picture right here, it's very moving and very appropriate to this day and time as we educate ourselves, deepen educating ourselves and our young people and the world, because the world, we're so disconnected from our history because it's never been told, it's been piecemealed. A little bit of this and a little bit of that. It's been piecemealed. And now it's time for it to be told in a manner where it communicates to all.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing this. Go ahead, keep going. Let's hear more about the family. Listen, this will be a longer than usual podcast, but it's worth it.
Oh, great. Okay. I haven't even looked at the time, Sheila. I'm just being with you.
Yeah, me too.
So here's a picture of my dad and Rosa. They are first cousins. And, Rosa's brother left home pretty early. And so, my dad and his 3 sisters were Rosa's, they were her surrogate sibling. And she spent a lot of time with us. They were very close.
Wow.
You can see that. You can see the love.
Yes. And some of the pictures I saw in the album too, it's amazing.
Yes. So podcasters, we're just going to flip through the album. We're going to look, there's a picture of Rosa and I, and, we've got a cup of tea and we've got the family photos all over the table. And
that's you right there, Rose.
Yeah, that is me. And we're kind of going through the pictures and talking, and she's talking about, some of the older pictures, some of the family pictures. And this is what, when she was with us, this is what we did. We did family, we did dinner, we looked, we had a cup of tea and looked at pictures. You'll see some of the other things that we did together. She did not want to talk about civil rights. She didn't want to talk about the Alabama bus boycott. She wanted to be family. She wanted to just relax and enjoy each other.
Yes.
And so, here's some family reunion pictures. And there's a picture here of her pushing her mom in a wheelchair. She was caregiver for her mom, for she loved her mother dearly. And here's times when we were visiting together. Christmas card and my sisters and brothers.
Oh, go back. I saw you. Yeah.
Let's see,
okay, there's you in the blue on that picture, yes?
Oh, yes. So Rosa, after she moved to Detroit, because, Alabama after a while was just too unsafe for her. So she actually moved to Detroit. But, winters are pretty harsh in Detroit. So Rosa would winter in Los Angeles. So there's a picture that Sheila and I are looking at here. It's my brother, Bill, and myself and Rosa. And my brother lived in San Francisco. But when I went out to visit my brother, we would drive down to visit Rosa, and that's what we had done this particular weekend. So this is the three of us visiting with her, where she wintered with an attorney, with one of the attorneys that worked with her in Los Angeles.
And then down there at the bottom, that's your dad again, right?
Yes. That's my dad.
I can see your dad.
And Rosa, and the oldest living matriarch of the family at that time, Aunt Every. So just family stuff, right?
Yeah.
And so, she was wonderful. Rosa always made sure that we were invited to all the shindigs that were happening. So when they opened, the Rosa Parks Museum, we were invited to the opening. When they restored the bus to the museum in Detroit, we were invited.
Is that your grandbaby?
That's my granddaughter.
Oh, my goodness.
The family was allowed to board the bus. They don't let people get on because of the wear and tear, but the family was allowed to get on the bus. And that is my granddaughter grinning at the fact that she got to sit in that seat.
Oh, that's the seat that Rosa Parks was in?
Yes. Isn't
that amazing?
Yes, that's the same one. So she's really happy about that, right? And then, she's getting on in years at this point. I think this was her 90th birthday party.
Amazing.
Yeah, and then, she was there when my dad passed away, and of course we were there when she had her sunset moment.
Yeah.
So, Rosa Parks, daughter, wife, community activist, sister, aunt, cousin, just tired of years of insults and humiliation. And as Dr. King said, longing for human dignity that motivates all oppressed people from all over the world. And so, by her active commitment and courage, that lovely, private, soft-spoken, upstanding lady became the mother of the civil rights movement. Mm. But Sheila, mostly, I just knew her as cousin.
Tremendous, outstanding, Rose. Outstanding. Thank you so much for sharing Rosa Parks with us from a family perspective, from an intimate perspective, her great-grandparents, the story of her life, pretty much. Just thank you so much. Is there anything in closing you want to leave us with what you loved about Rosa Parks, your cousin, and what you love about her legacy?
Well, I guess there's a couple of things, Sheila. Mm-hmm. Rosa was a yes. And I think we really need to look there. And sometimes we need to just be a yes to life, a yes to intention, attention,
yeah,
participation, goodness, and truth. Because I think Rosa was all of that. And I think that there's a blueprint there that was effective, that we need to review and maybe even refresh, revive, recreate, so that the time and energy that is now being expended to pick up this story where it left off makes as much of a difference as she did back then.
Thank you so much. That was so moving. Today we've had the privilege to have Rose Hampton, cousin of the late, great mother of the civil rights movement, Rosa Parks. Tell it in a way, share it in a way that's never been done before and never shared that way before. Thank you so much for listening to Sheila Speaks, and please keep listening, keep sharing, and we'll see you next week. Thank you. May God bless you. Bye-bye.